He did come home to do Top of the Pops, and they wanted children to go with him over to Woodley, where Gerald lives. Where Gerald lives. And they said, we'll bring some children from a drama school. And he said, oh no, you won't. There's plenty of children around here who we can gather, including my daughter, who's about 7, and dozens of the neighbours' children. And off they went up to Woodley. Well, David decided he would buy my dad a house because he wanted it to get him out of that small street where there was no grass or trees, and they found this lovely tree-lined avenue with blossom, and fell in love with the house, and he said, well, that's a better environment. Dad can walk in the park, and it would be better for his health, because he did have quite a problem with his lungs. It was very smoggy where we used to live in over here.
The wrought iron gate just bent in half. We had a front door with 3 panes of glass, and we were all inside, and all of a sudden the glass shattered. I couldn't believe it, and all the glass was on the inside in the hall. So I ran and got a dustpan and brush, and when I came back to sweep it up, there wasn't one piece of glass left, but there was bits of blood all over the floor where they'd all grabbed a piece like that. I didn't need to sweep any up at all. All the flowers disappeared out the front garden.
I came over, my husband and I, we came over to bring Deborah over to do this film, but there was just, you couldn't get into, you couldn't park your car or get into the gate or anything, could you?
No.
Beryl and I stayed behind and made a buffet meal for all these people that had gone up to, drove up into the countryside to do this filming of the of this. I think it was the first one he made, wasn't it, record? And they just wouldn't leave you alone. Sometimes if he came to Beryl's, he sometimes came over to me in Accrington, where hopefully nobody knew him, but you see it was the same there. There were children missing from Blackpool, phoning the police station in Accrington and saying there's a girl missing and we think she's gone to Accrington looking for one of the monkeys.
Yeah, same at Manchester.
They came up my drive looking through your kitchen window.
It was terrible. The street was full from one end to the other. There wasn't a yard between anybody. There was hundreds and hundreds of them. It was quite frightening, actually.
Yeah.
And then some nights, the press paid a lady over the road to sit in their front bedroom all night, so that if he came home during the night for a quiet visit, they would interview him. Nab him. Oh, just couldn't believe that everybody flocked round just to see him doing that, you know. We thought it was, well,
we've never seen anybody else do that.
We thought it was just stars that did that. Not just our brother. Yeah, it was good.
That he did a lot of charity work as well. He was very, very generous. Yeah. And he loved going into children's hospitals. They threw toys to the monkeys. They gathered them in big sacks and took them to the nearest children's hospital or a children's home. And they had many, many gifts given to them. And usually they distributed them to people. He had a charity for my mother, the Doris Jones Scholarship in Indian Town, and that sends young people to college who can't afford to go to. He was always into horses, and he was determined he was going to buy one. And the first one, he was called
Dig Past.
No, David Jones Locker, something Locker, when he was at Basil's. Pearl Locker, I think it was called.
After David Pearl.
And he couldn't take it to America at the time. I don't know what happened to that, but he always had a horse somewhere, stable somewhere. And he did come home and ride Dig Past at, where was it at? Lingfield. Now Lingfield, as soon as they knew he'd passed away, Lingfield did the next race on the Saturday.
First 2 races
with the Monkees.
Hey 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 with the Monkey Stakes.
Played monkey music.
And David Jones's what is it? Monkey something they called it. Stakes. The first 2 races.
They led the horses into the paddock and played David singing music. And now they've put a plaque on Lingfield Racecourse in front of a monkey puzzle tree in his name.
I heard his ex-wife rang me, the mother of his 2 youngest daughters, and she said, I've got some very bad news for you.
Gerald found out, I think.
Just,
Gerald found out first as well, didn't he?
I don't know.
Yeah, they rang Gerald, our cousin Gerald, and he rang me, and it was about 4:45 when he got through to me, and he said, are you on your own? I said, yeah, I live on my own, yes. He said, well, are you sitting down? Is anybody can... I said, well, what's happened? And he said, some terrible news. And we just couldn't believe it, we just couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, I'm glad he rang me because it was on ITV, not an hour later.
It was on BBC, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah.
They said he died at home in his sleep. He didn't at all, he just got off his horse and put it in the stables. But
Just had a pain and that was it.
yeah. And being so many miles from a hospital, even though the paramedics came out, it was too late. But I think all the times he flew everywhere and somewhere flying every week, and I don't think...
He said
That's
to my
good.
sister, who had been over for a month just before Christmas,
The other
he
sister.
said, Linda, the sister Linda who lives in Norfolk, he said, I love going on the stage, he said, but I hate this travelling. And they were travelling from Denver to somewhere, and every day, he did 48 shows last year. About 48 shows, something like that, in America. It was absolutely, you're in a hotel, I've been with them on tour, and Gerald's toured with them, and it's just, you don't know where you are, you get road, I don't know what you call it, road something, it's, you go into a hotel and you're off again to the next theatre. I've done it a few times, my husband and I did, on the tour bus.
Health check, didn't he? Not
Talia,
long
his
before.
eldest daughter, says that the people, he'd had a health check not long ago, and
The
his health was heart.
Doctor said he's got a heart of a 25-year-old.
Yeah. So we don't know, do we, what caused it really?
But
Travelling
his
didn't
daughter
help.
said he's had 10 lives. Didn't she? She said
He's
it's
packed
what
a lot
packed
in.
into his life.
Yeah, he
He's
has
had
packed in there.
10
And
lives.
he's had a very happy, enjoyable life on the stage. He absolutely adored the stage. And people adored him. I mean, Harry Seacombe has a picture of him on his piano. I've seen it when he was on television.
On the television when it was a
He
programme
loved
about Harry
him
Seacombe.
dearly.
Yeah.
And Roy Castle was taking over David's part in Pickwick.
Samuel.
And David helped him with his lines, and he said, Roy Castle said, go to my tailor's in London and have a suit made because you've helped me so much. Well, people absolutely loved him. The tributes I'm getting, I can't believe the tributes and people are writing from all over the world, from Japan and Australia and America and England, and they just absolutely...
Even Liz Jones in the Daily Mail, who has a go at most people, doesn't she?
Yeah.
You should see the article she wrote. It was lovely. She said she was in love with him aged
10-year-old,
8,
8 to
and
10.
she thought she was going to marry him because she was called Jones as well, and she thought, oh, I'll be marrying him, you know. And she said, you know, she's written something wonderful about. Well, I think it is anyway. And Paul Taylor from the Evening News, he wrote a lovely article as well.
There's been many articles, and you can't believe the press.
In fact, he
will
put goodbye to a genius on the thing, because I've cut it out, you know, and put it in a scrapbook. Yeah.
The tributes are still coming in now, and it's hard, you know, for people to write, and the fan clubs are devastated. He still has fan clubs in America and Japan. We just have to look back on the happy times that we all shared together. That's all we can do now, isn't it, really? And we had many happy times and lots of fun, you know, as well as the sad time.
And we've got him on film whenever we want, haven't we? So
And his music will
singing.
live on. David's music will live on forever.
Yeah.
Well, they would have been in the living room at Clumber Road, and I would have been around 5 or 6, and David had come to visit, and we used to do little shows, you know, and he'd sit and play the guitar for me, and I had no idea who he was. No, you know, at that age, no idea of his fame, or, you know, he was just my Uncle David with a guitar, and I used to dance about with a few of my cousins. And then going on into the late 70s when they did the reruns, and that's when I really realised who he was and about the shows. And I used to watch them on the school holidays, and you'd have the Banana Splits on first, and then the Monkees, and then Why Don't You? And all my friends were like, "That's your uncle on the telly." And yeah, no, and sort of that's how my recognition of my uncle came about, really, in the late 70s, early 80s, because I'm a second generation Monkee fan, you know, and that's how I got to know what he was about, really, what his fame was about. Well, I used to sit in the lounge at home and watch them, you know, because it was the school holidays, and I'd be off school, and you know, it'd be on as part of the TV, and obviously I made sure I was watching it anyway because I knew it was Uncle David, and I used to think it was zany and it was fun, and my friends, you know, all loved it, because we're all sort of that age, you know, where it was a good fun show, and it was on during the school holidays, and I have happy memories, and that's one of my childhood programmes, really. Well, my uncle would come home as often as he possibly could. I mean, he had a young family over in the States, but his roots were in Manchester, and he used to love to come home. Obviously, his parents had passed away by this time, but Mum lived in the family home, so he used to come to our house, and that was the central point for the family, really, at that time. So he'd come and visit, and we used to have parties, and he'd be involved in that, and he'd be just, you know, our David. Yeah, my uncle loved horses, obviously, from going to Newmarket as a trainee jockey, and then obviously doing the Monkees gave him the fortune to be able to buy some horses, and he had quite a few over the times, you know, and he just loved riding them. And then as the years went on, he bought a racehorse called Digpass, which he actually won a race at Lingfield. I think he was around 50 years old when he did it, and he was absolutely thrilled. You know, that is probably, given all his fame in anything else, that is probably his proudest moment of winning that race in his entire life. Oh yeah, he had a natural way with horses. He had 14 horses over in Florida, you know, and he loved horses. You know, I think horses gave him a little bit of quiet time away from the limelight. You know, he could be himself, he could go out and ride, and he felt free when he was out on a horse. I think through the 70s and 80s, and then especially during the 80s, that's when he had more horses, and he had a place down in Hampshire where he had stables, where he kept his horses by his house. So, you know, he could ride every single day. I went on many of the tours when my uncle was performing. You know, every 5-10 years they'd do a Monkee reunion tour, and as I got a little bit older, I'd pack a bag and off I'd go for a fortnight around England with them. I had an absolute ball. I loved watching him perform. You know, I'd watch 10 performances, all the same shows, but I never grew tired of watching him perform. You know, I went over to Epcot and watched him over there. Every time he was in England, I was at every show I could get to. My uncle loved performing to an audience. You know, he thrived off his audience. He enjoyed being on the stage. It was one of his passions in life. The Monkees had grown into being David's brothers, really, you know, especially Mickey. And so the time they got together to perform and do a tour, he really enjoyed being back in that time. And I suppose it reminded him of his earlier days. Being out with the lads on the road, you know, and the last few tours, you know, he really enjoyed going out there and meeting the fans again, and you know, fans that had been loyal for 45 years were still around, and they're still around today. You know, they still follow the guys and what they're doing. So growing up through the 70s and 80s, you know, whenever my uncle was on stage anywhere, he'd be in pantomimes, he was in Godspell, and he was in London performing. Mum, I and cousins and Auntie Hazel and that, we'd jump on a train and we'd go down and we'd spend a couple of days down there watching the show and that. And it was really exciting. I mean, I was 7, 8 years old, you know, and going into London to watch these shows. And we had an absolutely amazing time. I remember once, David was presenting for Mickey Mouse's 50th birthday party, and I was 7 years old and I got to go to Mickey Mouse's 50th birthday party. There's not many young ladies could say that at that time. I have fond memories of my uncle. As I got older, he'd become more like my brother. We had a real good rapport when we were together. I'm going to miss the great times we had together, you know, the fun times we had out on the road watching him perform. You know, I wanted to take my kids out to see him in Epcot. Obviously that's not going to happen now. But we had some great times, you know, fun. You know, he'd come up to my house, I would take him up to the local curry house, or he'd get off the plane in Manchester and I'd go and pick him up. And one of the first things he wanted to do, say, Bev, take me down to Openshaw. Let's go down and have a look round. And we'd have a drive around the streets and we'd look at the old church and we'd go back to his old school. And once the caretaker came out and he said, Davy, I knew you'd come back one day. And next thing, it must have been half term, and he whisked us inside. And we had a tour around the school, and there in the hall, sitting on a plinth, was his old desk. David loved that. He was absolutely amazed, and he was at the MEN that night, and he invited the caretaker down to watch the show, and he was telling the whole audience about his school and how they'd still got his desk, and funnily enough, they'd built his new school right on his house, where his old little house used to be, you know, which he saw in May 2011 when he came over. He saw them building it right there, so he was thrilled to see that. David loved coming home to Manchester. Every time he came, he felt at home. He'd grown up here, although he didn't like the weather over in Manchester. You know, hence why he moved over to the States, partly. But he loved to come home and see. And he was very passionate about Manchester, and very passionate about his roots. You know, he never forgot where he came from. He never became this big persona or this big personality that forgot where he'd learnt his trade. And he wrote a song about it. He wrote a song called I'm a Manchester Boy. He wrote a song called Manchester Boy, and it was about being a Manchester boy. You know, I'm a Manchester boy, my mum's pride and joy. Chip off the old block, my dad. I can dance, I can sing, I can do anything. Nothing's too hard if I try. And then it tells the story of him getting on the train and going off, and his dad crying at the station, you know. It's a real nice tune, something he's very proud of, you know. He loved that track. Whether it was getting off a plane or getting off a train, he used to love coming back to his old town in Manchester, and he used to say, Bev, come on, will you take me back? So I'd get him in my little car, you know, and off we'd go, and we'd tour around, and we'd go to Openshaw, you know, we'd go to the old school at Varna Street, we'd go to Lee Street Congregational Church, where we are today, and we'd go and visit his mum and dad's grave, and you know, and then go back to Clumber Road and have a look at the old house, you know, and he loved to see the old neighbours and people around, and when the aunties and uncles were alive, we'd go and visit Auntie Flo and Uncle George and Auntie Betty and Auntie Jessie, you know. I actually went and lived with my uncle for 6 months when I left college. I went down there and stayed in Old Bedhampton, and Annabelle was 2 years old, and I helped to look after her and you know, just helped around, and that was a fun time, you know, just being around him while he was out working and doing bits and pieces. And we were going to go off to America this particular time, but it wasn't to be, because being accident prone as he was, he'd fell off a horse and broke his shoulder, so we didn't end up going. But you know, it was a nice time to be down there and have some time there after. So my uncle was over in May 2011, and we had a great tour. It was the 45th anniversary tour, and he was really in good form. You know, he was really in a happy place. He was really enjoying himself over on the stage with the guys again, and so the last tour he did was and the reviews they got were fantastic. The papers, you know, sometimes they don't always give great reviews. They got standing ovations at the Albert Hall, and many venues that they visited. they did a great interview on Loose Women, and they'd got the Monkey Mobile there, and they'd got Sherry Hewson in the back with the guys, and they drove sort of into the studio, and then they came out, and a very positive interview, and it was real good fun, and they had them in the studio, you know, and yeah, it was great, you know, having fun and actually enjoying it, you know, they were enjoying being in each other's company. I was at home with my children, coming from school, and my dad phoned me and he said, I could hear this noise in the background, and it was my mum, and I thought, what's going on? And he said, Beverley, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah, Dad, what's the matter? What's the matter? And he said, I've got some very bad news for you. So I said, what's the matter, Dad? And he said, your Uncle David's passed away. And I said, pardon? He said, your Uncle David's passed away. I said, how? And he said he's had a heart attack, and they couldn't resuscitate him. So I said, oh right, I'm coming. Just give me 10 minutes. Just give me 10 minutes. And of course I went into shock for a little while. But I remember my uncle always having time for people. He was 100 miles an hour man. 100 miles an hour. Everything was done at 100 miles. You know. He tried to fit so much in and live the life of 10 men, you know. He did so much with his life, and I'll remember that. And he was a very positive man. And he'd always ask about what you're doing and what you're getting up to, and he'd always sort of put a positive spin on things. Although I didn't see my uncle every day or every week, I always knew he was there, and I'll miss knowing he's out there, you know. I'll miss knowing he's in the States doing his thing, knowing that he's not going to jump on a plane and come back to Manchester for us to take him around and see everybody.